Hi, it is Janet. This is Janet Fitch, and it is noon on Wednesday, and so it is Writing Wednesday, where I answer your questions about writing, life, pursuit of happiness, and all kinds of other things. So if you have questions, please leave them in comments, and we'll see if we can answer them today. Today, I wanted to talk about two really good questions. Hi, Jeffrey. I wanted to talk about two really good questions that I got. I've been doing a fiction first aid with the community of writers, formerly Squaw Valley community of writers. And they're offering a bunch of online things in the next year. I hope we'll be meeting back in real life, but for the time being, they're going to be doing a bunch of different kinds of classes and offerings. Hi, Roberta. And one of them is a monthly first aid, like a writer's emergency clinic, last Friday of the month, in 15-minute consults with various of their writer instructors, including myself. And it seems like 15 minutes. How much can you get done in 15 minutes? But it forces you to figure out what it is that you want to ask and go ahead and ask it. And what it also does is your consultant or your mentor doesn't have time to beat around the bush. So they'll give it to you straight, and you'll get a good answer and a workable answer. And two of the writer participants that I had this time had really good questions, and I thought applicable to everybody, not just to themselves. So, the benefit of a private consult is you get exactly the information that you need for your work, but also a benefit to everybody is a good question is a good question, and usually applies to more than just the person who asked it. Hi, everybody. Hi, Sayward. Hi, Jill. Hi, Kimberly. Good to see you here for Writing Wednesday. So these are questions that came from the Fiction First Aid, and there'll be another one the last Friday of the month. So the first one was about fiction versus not memoir. It's not a memoir story. Fiction versus nonfiction, dealing with this would be an historical subject, and the writer's work this is probably third draft stuff. Usually I'm finding a lot of the people that who are contacting the community of writers for this fiction first aid are people who've been working on something for a while. So they've been beating their heads against the wall on their own for a good long time, and they know what their question is. They know what their difficulty is. So if that's of any interest to you, keep an eye out. I'll always announce it on my author page. But the question that this person had, they were working on a novel about two artists, and kind of famous artists, their friendship, some art related issues. Which sounded fantastic to me. I love stories about artists and the lives of artists. That tends to be what I write. But when he had shown it to agents, the response had been, is this a novel or is this nonfiction? And if it is nonfiction, which they thought it was, to please send a proposal for the nonfiction work. because fiction is usually sold on the basis of a completed work, where nonfiction is sold on the basis of usually first chapters and an outline. So it's a proposal. The one thing that generally nonfiction is pushed by agents, just so you know, FYI, agents tend to like nonfiction better because they can sell it before it's finished. They can sell it on the basis of a chapter, of a proposal, and usually chapters and an outline. Where fiction, they want to see the whole thing. I mean, not just you, me too, and everybody else. Nobody buys a pig in a poke when it comes to fiction. Maybe Stephen King can sell a novel before it's finished, but generally not. So this guy's, difficulty was that he was writing fiction, or what he thought was fiction, but they kept thinking that it was nonfiction, which was not his intent. And so this tells me a couple of things. He's saying, what can I do to make this clearly a novel? Why is it, why do they keep perceiving it as nonfiction? It tells me that the story is not being told through character. That there's a lot of, I imagine there's a lot of history, a lot of fact-based material gleaned from research that is describing a situation rather than having it arrive through the point of view of its characters. It's a voice problem because the voice of nonfiction is very different than the voice of fiction. The voice of fiction is always strained through character. And you see what the character sees in the moment, in the scene. You have thoughts of what the character is thinking in the scene that you're writing. It tells me it might not be written in the scene. And we've talked about scene, being the live moment, and there's dialogue, and which he has, but it's also the thoughts of the character and how the character is seeing everything. And it's expanding a fictional world of observation and internal thoughts and feelings, using all the senses. So I suggested that he consider, I said, which of the artists is your point of view character? And he did not know. So that's a problem. A fiction needs to have a protagonist. Which of these guys is the protagonist? Now, I said, which would you want to be if you had a point of view? He said, well, maybe I could introduce an imagined third character to see them both through their eyes. That's okay, but then you're just making your task even harder because you have to create a life and a sensibility and needs and background and all for this imaginary third character, and scenes where they are physically present, which just tangles you up even more. So I suggested that he pick one character is going to be his protagonist, and it was pretty clear which one it would be because there are two characters, and one of them is a native-born American. The other is not, and that makes language, voice. I think it would be more spectacular if he could do both and alternate their stories. And then one of them is the protagonist, meaning you begin with them and you end with them. but you can go back and forth and toggle between them. That would be something that would catch in the two voices, distinct voices. Even in third person, it would be inflected by their way of thinking, their metaphors, their sensual reality, from their perspective, even if it's third person. We talked about Painted Black, which is a very close third. There's no mistaking that for nonfiction. And then if he could capture both voices and the two very distinct voices, I mean, that would be an eye catcher. But you have to be, so I suggested that he try it. If he has too much difficulty with the non-native speaker, and his language, his point of view, even in third person, after reading some of his letters, maybe hearing tapes of him speaking, getting a sense of him and his language, you tell it in the other person's point of view, the one that he can do. You have, at some point, you have to have a realistic sense of what you can do, not by guessing ahead of time, but by trying it out and seeing how you do. And it's like, I'm not finding this very convincing. I think I'm going to go back and just do the character that I can do and have him tell the story from his point of view. But you can have characters who know the other person well and see him all the time, who could tell you about what's going on with the other guy if you don't see him as much. Certainly the live scenes where the men are together will be vividly observed. As we know, you more closely observe the other person in a live scene than you do yourself. So, and the guys in art, they're both artists. So the artists are very observant, or can be. Also pretty egotistical, so good voice, very opinionated usually, which makes for good voice in a novel. Good. You need that spin, you need that perspective to make, so that anybody opening it would know this is a novel. We are going to live this story. We're not just going to read about the story as you would in nonfiction. So so I hope that works for him, but it was 15 minutes. We were able to address the central problem he's been having with this book for quite some time. So, there's something very nice about a little 15-minute consult, just, to ask that question and get some answers. The other question that really resonated with me, and I still am thinking about, was an experimental writer, a poet. And poets make wonderful fiction writers. There's no law that says if you're a poet, you can't write fiction. If you're a fiction writer, you can't write poetry. There is, an infinite amount of interface between the two ways of looking at the world. And but this was an experimental novel. Short, 90 pages, novella length, which is a nice length for experimental work. Sometimes you don't want to read 400 pages of something, but 90 is kind of nice. But her difficulty is that her readers were totally lost, totally and completely lost. So we had, that was not her intention. In writing an experimental work, right? You want your reader to be intrigued and enchanted and marvel at these cool new ideas and forms and what you're doing. Should be maybe a little bit of a detective, work. I mean, these works are meant to be somewhat challenging, but they shouldn't be mystifying. That's the failed experiment, is when people read it and go, I have no idea what's going on here. I don't know I don't even know who's what the story is. If you do write experimental fiction or you want to give it a try, your early readers are really important. Usually the readers of experimental fiction are other writers and poets. So if she had given this work to her roommate or her mom or her best friend, she might be getting a wrong read on the work. If they can't follow it, I mean, they might not be able to follow many a pretty famous experimental novel, like To the Lighthouse, or, chapters of Ulysses or thing. So you want somebody who can read a fairly sophisticated text and allow the suspension of not knowing for a while what's going on, so that if they really don't get it, then you can trust that you need to put a handrail in there, when they're crossing that particular cliff, because they keep falling off. You're losing your readers over the side. You don't want to lose your readers over the side. But if they're all mountaineers, then the challenge will excite them. You just don't want them to continue to fall into the sea and onto the rocks, right? So we didn't have time for her to tell me whether, she had chosen adequate readers, but I had a sense that she had not. So that already helped. So once you get your good reader, or readers, maybe 2 or 3 of them, always look for the upward end of your literary crowd of people who are accustomed, like her friend. She's a poet, show it to your poet friends. Can they follow the story or not? Now, if they can't, then you need some work. The other thing was to, she started with someone who never again appears in the book. The opening part of any work, but especially something that is experimental, gives them their first handhold. If there's nowhere to put the piton into the rock, then you're really asking for, solo free climb, likely to fall and kill themselves. That you want to give them a handhold, so that as you go along, it's like, oh yeah, that's that girl that was in the beginning. Just to locate yourself. So in experimental work, the rope across the river, we've talked about the spine of the book. The main problem, the through line, it would be a kind of a jargony way of putting it. I don't like jargon. So I always think of it as the rope across the river that helps you haul yourself across the flood. In experimental fiction, the rope can be very delicate. Sometimes only it's a rope in the writer's mind. But a good reader can feel the central issue or issues. Maybe an image that recurs, a gesture that recurs. It doesn't have to be much, but it shows that the writer is thinking of the structure of the whole thing. They're not just wandering and throwing out little pieces of God knows what. That there is, if you're doing a puzzle and you get a box full of pieces, the reader has to have some confidence that all the pieces are to the same puzzle. That's all. So with a little bit of a fragment, was a fragmented work, but with a little bit of the fragment to begin with, at least to place the protagonist in the book, would help that book quite a bit. So it was really fun, and I always, it's fun to have a bunch of different problems presented one after the other. It's like speed chess, which I like. So anyway, I would love to answer any questions that you have today. I do want to say we always talk about the senses, working from the senses, and how do you bring a scene to life? How do you make it live? And I will be offering through the community of writers in October, the 9th through the 11th, or whatever that weekend is, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, an intensive class, in a workshop in writing from the senses. So I will let you know when that actually goes up. If you want to sign up for it, it'll be Friday night, 2 sessions on Saturday, 2 sessions on Sunday, and we'll really go through the senses one at a time and unlock and see how to use them, and what they're good for, and how to access them, and exercises. And it'll be an intensive, in case your life has been very formless, that this will be a weekend that you know what you're going to be doing is writing. So what else? Can I explain how it would work? Is it interactive or lecture-based? Megan is asking. This is the class, the sense class that I'll be teaching. It'll be both, because interaction without any information, you'll just do what you do. You won't progress. So you have to have both. And depending on how large it is, there will be interaction always, because that's what I like. But it won't be like a workshop where you bring in 10 or 12 pages and we go over your work. It'll be generative with using the senses. And let's see, what else can I tell you? Oh, I am reading, last week we talked about metaphor, and I am reading the most wonderful book. Everybody knows that I am tremendously, Jeffrey, I'll get to your question. Everybody knows I'm tremendously impressed and admire John le Carré as a writer. I think that if he didn't write in a genre, mystery, spy thriller, that he would be considered one of our very finest writers, bar none. You know, he's the heir to Graham Greene. He's not quite as philosophical. There's still, the thriller element is very strong in le Carré, but man, can that guy write. So I've been reading, you know, some really difficult stuff, and I was just very attracted to reading something gripping, you know, that, and, you know, very profluent. And I am reading The Night Manager by John le Carré, and the metaphors. Remember, we talked last week about metaphor and how some people feel that metaphor is very, you know, oh, I don't use metaphor, very flowery. And I'm saying that no, it doesn't have to be flowery. It gives you another perspective on an event or an observation, something that helps you see it more clearly. It's a very precise kind of lens. And so I wanted to show you some of the John le Carré metaphors. Corcoran stares disapprovingly upward like a man peeing. And can't you see that? The stance, the body language, that's not flowery. It's precise. The girl's hip rides carelessly against Jonathan's flank in cheerful friendship. She smells not of vanilla, but of white carnations on commemoration. I assume that's some sort of English holiday. See, we're going to do, the sense of smell is a really powerful agent of memory, and we'll do that in the sense class. We'll work with that. So this is, you know, what does she smell like? You know, white carnations on commemoration. So they're so specific. It's not just she smells like carnations, but white carnations, because carnation is spicy, but white carnations, there's sort of an innocence about it, and commemoration, whatever that means to English people. It's some sort of national holiday, right? Hi, Brenda. Let's see. What else do we have? Oh, such wonderful. Just the choice of adjectives. I'm looking for. Oh, he's talking about watching a bombing on TV, and he says the base of a building pops like a paper bag. So he talks about the bomb falling, and then pops like a paper bag. It gives you such a clear image that you could just, say they dropped the bomb and the building exploded. Doesn't give you that as clear an image. And he saw it. He was probably watching footage on TV, saw it, and then kept thinking, well, how can I describe that explosion? What do I actually see? And he sees this inflating the bottom of the building and then the explosion. And so it's like, what does that? Oh, it's like a paper bag that explodes. So good. The window slipped its ancient fastening and toppled like a guillotine. You get such a precision in the description rather than just it slipped its fastening and banged down on the sill. There's something about the guillotine. It adds a certain kind of suspense to the scene, too. Just a little gesture. Here, why so squeamish about drugs anyway? A Treasury man complained, his fingertips propped together like a bamboo bridge. He looked at this, and we think steeple, he steepled his fingers, we've heard of that. But he looked at that and he said, what does that remind me of? And the long fingers would be the bamboo bridge. It also has that sort of bridge over the River Kwai subtext. This is very good. The way he searches for a clarity about what he's seeing and to make a larger statement about the world. We've talked about that. Can you go beyond the moment and tell us something about the world? That's what people read great fiction for. After dinner, Goodhue had left Palfrey at the table with his wife so that he could pour out his soul to her. Goodhue and his wife. Goodhue is in the Secret Service, and the wife, I believe, is familiar with this anyway. After dinner, Goodhue had left Palfrey at the table with his wife so that he could pour out his soul to her, because there is nothing that dissolute men like better than confessing themselves to virtuous women. And that's why you read John le Carré, because he has a bigger statement about the world. Not just he left his wife with Palfrey because he knew that Palfrey would talk to her and tell her things that he wouldn't tell Goodhue. That's the idea, but he wants to enchant you. He wants to give you something more. And we should always want to give the reader something more than just a workmanlike description of something. We want to delight you. We want to bring you something more. And that's what the reader comes to you for, is something more than just a basic description. He does this every page, every page, every paragraph. And reading this inspired me to, my writing became better the day I did this. The temptation is to read something like John le Carré very quickly because it's so good. It's like eating this great ice cream or something and you just want to eat the whole thing. So the discipline is to read it slowly and notice what the magician is doing, which is always a little bit of work. He makes me think like a writer. Let's see if I can find another really good one. The day had been sullen and damp. I always think one should do the weather, put us somewhere. We don't want to be just drifting in mid-ocean, right? The day had been sullen and damp, an evening that began at breakfast. So instead of, okay, what's the basics, is saying it was a wet and rainy morning. Okay, that's serviceable. If you think of automobiles, of transport, you're walking when you say the day had been rainy and damp. When you go into sullen, then you're getting a mood. He's putting an emotion onto the landscape, onto the weather. It wasn't just blissfully cool, it was sullen. So who was sullen, right? It starts to describe. The day had been sullen and damp. And then he's thinking, okay, but can I give you something more? Can I do something more? Something more interesting? Okay, it's dark and it's still morning. It was dark all day. Dark all day. Okay, how am I going to put that in better language? It was an evening that began at breakfast. So that's work. That he didn't just pop that off of his head. He thought about it and then gave you something. Let's see if I can find one more. The church tower's chimes. The church tower's chimes, something bag in your ear, like a boxing gong. I mean, I've heard church towers ring, I've heard them chime, all that stuff, but to ring like a boxing gong. He sat there and go, what does it really sound like? I'm sure that's a real chime. And he sat there and listened to it clang and thought, what does it really sound like? It sounds like a boxing gong. So it takes a while to get this kind of stuff. Brenda asked, do you do this kind of work after you have a solid draft or all the way through your process? I'll do it at any given moment. I'll do it at the end of a draft when I see just the writing is not thoroughly digested. It's not really been processed. It hasn't really been crafted. I sometimes will do it as I'm writing. I'll write the bad line and then I'll sit there and go, oh, that's not very, can I do something more interesting? And I'll I'll do it right then and there. Let's see. And then Jeffrey had a question. Back when we were talking about fiction versus, is it fiction, is it nonfiction? He wanted to know, when you're in the middle of writing fiction, and it's got the potential to either be YA or a regular novel, what do you recommend doing? I don't think that you need to do anything. I think that you notice, who is this intended for? If it's intended for adults, you're going to work at the capacity of your vocabulary and you're going to put characters into morally difficult situations. There will be gray areas. There will be maybe it won't be as linear. If you notice that it doesn't have a lot of secondary material, there's no subplots, that you notice that you're pretty much intending a teenage audience, you notice that the language that you're using, you don't really want to be making too many experiments or pushing language, if that's not your intention. And you feel that this is something that a young person will identify with, and the morality is very clear, then you're probably looking at a young adult. But I don't think you push it either way. I just think you write it and notice what it is. And then when an agent will look at it, they might be the ones. When I wrote my first young adult, first and second, my agent told me, this is a young adult novel. And I tried, and not much happened, because what I really like is language and murky emotional situations. So it turns out that I was not a young adult writer. So you just have to figure out what, you have to ask yourself, the work, what it wants to be, basically, or take a look and see what it is. So what else? So anyway, I wanted to share what the ideas of observation, like with John le Carré, he'll make an observation as a writer. He sees something. And then the writer, the crafter of sentence, the crafter of language, and the thinker come in. And they ask questions like, what is it? Why is it? Where is it? Who is it? And what can you tell me? Can you tell me something more about this? Can you be more specific? Can the language be more specific? It's a dark, rainy day. It's pretty, you're walking. But when you get sullen in there, now you got a little sports car. Now you're cooking with gas. And if you have that little sports car, the day was sullen and dread, but then you get an evening that began at breakfast, then you're out of that sports car and you're in the rolls. It's like, how good can you get? Well, have some ambition. When you read good work, slow down, notice what they're doing, write down the really good lines, get excited, and then when you look at your own work, you'll go, oh, I didn't really go far enough here. Oh, there's a better way to describe this. Oh, this is, I'm on foot. I've got a skateboard here, Maybe I have a basic econo car, smart car or something. But if I put a little work, maybe I get the sports car. Maybe I get, I get something more interesting. How do you avoid cliche? Well, we talked about cliche before, and I will be happy to address it at all points. A cliche is anything you've ever heard before, ever, and spanned. So anything you've ever heard before, adjective, noun combination, golden sunsets, no golden sunsets. No golden sunsets, no rolling of the eyes, none of these cliche gestures. You avoid cliche by being extremely honest and asking yourself, did you create that language for that place in that story? Is it one size fits all? Is it anything you've ever heard before? Is it, how dark is dark? You can say black is night, black is ink, dark is whatever, but then stop, go say, have I heard that before? Yeah. Go back and try to find another dark. So you avoid cliche by being aware of what you're doing, aware of what you've seen, aware, strictly honest, and then by working to create something new in the moment. What else? Ask me anything. I've got a couple more minutes for you. Okay, well, I strongly recommend John le Carre. That is really, Dark as a Witch's Scowl is very nice, you know? Um, there's all kinds of, I mean, I would say find it, like we did last week, dark as, light as, blah, 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 and do 20 of them. And some of the nicest are not physical reality at all. There are things like Dark as a Witch's Scowl. You know, the red of my, you know, of my mother's hair after she got fired. You know, things like that. Any last minute questions here? Let's see what I might have missed. Yeah, so definitely the sense class, which will be, I believe, on the 10th. Let me take a look. My sense of time has become really bad. So the class would be in October, the 9th, 10th, and 11th, and it would be the whole weekend. So if you're interested in taking that class, blank out Friday night, all of Saturday, all of Sunday, because I'm going to use you. And we're going to look at each of the senses and what they are good for, how you reach into your memories and use them for springboards to the imagination, all kinds of things that prevent you from being able to describe things if you don't have a handle on this. I was looking at a knife in the knife drawer when I was thinking about this. Looking at and you know, it's like, how would somebody describe this knife? You know, I can do it, but there are certain techniques that writers use that you can read it a million times, but maybe you haven't stopped to analyze, how does a physical object get described? People don't do a lot. If you read a lot of fiction, it's pretty two-dimensional. You have people talking. It's like more like watching TV. You know, you have people talking, but they don't interact with the environment except in genre fiction, which, you know, the vividness of the thriller requires the physical world. But all fiction requires the physical world because we are physical beings. And that's how we encounter the world. So here's another question came in. Did you talk about future online questions? Yes, I'm going to teach an intensive, Brenda, an intensive sense class, a weekend workshop, October 9th, 10th, and 11th. And they haven't, you know, we're still talking about the shape of it and all that. So I will definitely share it on my page here when it opens for registration. Interesting. Now, Rebecca's saying, I think it might be helpful for people who dissociate from the body in daily life due to trauma. Oh, yeah. We're all kind of divorced from our physical body, but yeah, people who are suffering from trauma are even more so. We all are sort of traumatized by life. You know, I think adulthood is sort of traumatizing and the world is tough, and we all kind of armor up and cut ourselves off from a source of joy, you know, because we're afraid we're afraid of it. So this is a wonderful place to do it, is in your fiction, and then you can give that to the reader, you know, so it's a double gift. Easier to describe things in a foreign setting, Brenda says. In familiar setting, I default to labels. Okay, so I will really talk about that, because in the world of the senses, hearing something and saying it's the, you know, and bells, the sound of bells filled the air, is labeling the sound of bells. Well, it's avoiding the hard work of using your writer. And we have this stuff called language. It's all we have. And by labeling, you know, helicopters filled the air. What exactly do helicopters sound like? You don't label, you actually describe that sound. Can you capture the sound of helicopters? And you can do it. If you do it 9 different ways, 1 or 2 will be really good, but you have to get used to that. The reason why sense impressions are so much more vivid when you travel, and I've taught a class in the travel journal with Pico Iyer at Esalen. That was really fun. If anybody out there has took that class, you'll remember. That was amazing. Is because it's not familiar, so it doesn't hit the treads, the ruts in the road in your mind. They're always dismissed by labels or cliches. If it's something you've never seen before, you struggle, you compare it to something, you try to describe, and the impression is already fresh. So what we have to do in our own world is what the surrealists call defamiliarizing yourself with the world. And they played a lot of games to defamiliarize the world, like Looking for Miracles, or there's a game Smoke, or a game Exquisite Corpse. They played, and that helps defamiliarize. But when you take things one at a time and you give yourself the time to really interact with something, really address it physically, you know, not just dry labbing and imagining, but holding something, feeling it, and then challenging yourself to use language to describe it, and then are given some help as to techniques to do that, you find a way to address yourself to the very familiar, because you're looking again, you're defamiliarizing it, you're addressing it directly. So it doesn't become something that you know, but something that you discover. And it's going to be great because we're all locked in our houses, basically, for the most part. And yet there's a world of imagining coming your way, using the senses. It's a way to break out of that brain in jar situation. Yeah, the travel journal class was great with Pico Iyer. Unbelievable, really fun. So, wanted to ask about Paint It Black. Describe a tree scent through Josie's perception of the moment and state it smelled of something and loss, like pitch pine and loss. That rings a bell. So these abstract descriptions are really great when you're talking about smell or color or sound, and I'll be taking you through all that. So keep track of me here. I'm always here on Wednesdays, and I will be posting when the class opens for registration. So if it interests you, just write on here, and I'll try to keep a list and let you know ahead of time. All right. Well, thank you very much for watching the show, and I wish you good writing. Okay. Bye.